Okay, welcome back. Good morning. It's time for our next lab. Our next lab is the respiratory system. And I'm just going to go through the lab book with you, help you fill out a couple things. And then, we'll leave it at that, right? It's important to have your lab book filled out because when we do lab exams, you want to have that lab book handy with all the information in there. All right, so let's begin. All right, so the respiratory system, this is going to include identifying the structures, determining the direction of blood flow and air flow through the tubes of the lungs, examining histology. Histology is what types of tissues, the study of tissues that we're going to see. There's a picture in here. Normally, if you were to come in the lab, there would be models of a healthy lung compared to a smoker's lung. And then, of course, like all the other labs, we're going to try to apply the scientific method while doing any of the activities, but we're probably going to scratch that, being that we're doing this lab remotely. All right. So as they function, our cells use oxygen, and at the same time as our cells are working, they're producing carbon dioxide. It is the job of the respiratory system and the lungs to bring in the oxygen, specifically to put it into the blood so that the heart could deliver that oxygen to all the cells that need it. That allows the cells to continue to do work. As the cells are working as a result of cellular respiration, they are also producing carbon dioxide, so that carbon dioxide needs to be removed from the cells, from the tissues. So the carbon dioxide diffuses out of the cells and gets picked up by the blood. The blood will then deliver that deoxygenated blood with carbon dioxide in it back to the right side of the heart, and then that right side of the heart sends that blood to the lungs. The carbon dioxide diffuses into the lungs before it is eliminated from the body. All right, so breathing is an important part of this. When we're breathing, that's how we're getting the oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. All right. One respiratory cycle consists of one inhalation and one exhalation, or one inspiration and expiration. All right, so we could determine respiratory rates. And on average, for a healthy adult, this is usually about between 12 and 18 breaths per minute. However, respiratory rate changes throughout the day depending on levels of activity. So knowing the function of the cardiovascular system and knowing the function of the respiratory system, why would the heart rate and the respiratory rate change during exercise? Well, because when you're exercising, there's an increased demand by the muscles for oxygen. So we have to deliver oxygen to the muscles faster, right? So if we need to deliver oxygen to the muscles faster, that's going to require breathing to be faster. And we also have to eliminate carbon dioxide gas faster. But in addition to that, we have to increase heartbeat, right? The heart rate, because we have to pump that oxygenated blood out to the muscles faster. All right, so we could fill this in pretty easily as activity increases, the demand for oxygen increases. Causes respiratory rates and heart rate to increase. And the same thing would be true if activity decreases, right? So the demand for oxygen would decrease, and then respiratory rate would decrease, and cardiac rates would decrease as well. All right, so this would be a model that would be at the tables, and they want us to label the model, but they do kind of give us some hints here. So what are we looking at here? Well, these are the openings where air comes in, right? So this is the nostrils. And then from the nostrils, the air goes into the nasal cavity. We can label that. And what's happening in the nasal cavity? Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's mucus in there. There's this area is lined with ciliated cells, ciliated epithelial cells. There's blood vessels in there. So what's happening? Well, the air is being filtered by the hairs in the nostrils and the mucus. It's being moistened by the mucus and it's being warmed, right? The air is being warmed as it's passing through the nasal cavity, making close contact with the warm blood inside the capillaries. And then from the nasal cavity, it enters into the pharynx. And then the pharynx takes that air. Now, remember, the pharynx is a common passageway for not only air, but also food, especially behind the mouth. And the food has to go one way while the air has to go the other way. And the structure that diverts the food away from the trachea is called the epiglottis. All right, so the epiglottis closes when we're swallowing food, and the blue arrows indicate the direction of food. And when we're breathing, the epiglottis is open. That allows air to go down into the trachea. This is a picture of the larynx, and you can see the larynx has these vocal cords. This would be another model that would be on the table. You'd be able to see the vocal cords in the model. The vocal cords would vibrate, obviously, as we pass air through there, producing sound. There's a lot of cartilage in the larynx. This cartilage, this anterior portion of the larynx, is made of a lot of cartilage. It's hyaline cartilage. All right, so the voice box is the larynx. And the larynx would be the end of the upper respiratory system. That's the bottom of the respiratory system. Once we go through the larynx, we enter into the trachea, and the trachea begins the lower respiratory zone. This trachea, as you remember from the pig dissection, has those cartilage rings around it. When we expose the trachea in the pig, we can see those rings there. So what are we looking at over here? We're looking at different tubes inside the lungs. There's three different tubes really inside the lungs. There's arteries, there's veins, and then there's the bronchial tubes. Two of those tubes are carrying blood. One of those tubes is carrying air. All right, so the red tubes are carrying oxygenated blood towards the heart. Because they're going towards the heart, they have to be veins, right? Specifically, these are going to be pulmonary veins. And then the blue ones are bringing deoxygenated blood away from the heart. If blood is being moved away from the heart, it's being moved inside an artery. If we're going to the lungs, then for sure it's the pulmonary artery. Then these white tubes, they're the tubes of the actual lungs. These are the tubes that are bringing air into the lungs, and these are called bronchial tubes. And of course, we have this big sheet of muscle down here that controls the breathing. It also provides a wall of separation between the thoracic cavity, which is where the lungs and the heart are, from the abdominal cavity. So if we could fill out just some very brief descriptions or functions of each of these. Air enters the upper respiratory zone through the nostrils, right? As we said before, the nasal cavity filters, moistens, and warms the incoming air. Pharynx, well, we already said that the pharynx is a common passage, right? Not only for air, but also for food. But in this context, we could just say that the pharynx delivers air from the nasal cavity towards the larynx. And of course, a very important structure is the epiglottis. The epiglottis diverts food away from the trachea and toward the esophagus. Right, so the larynx is another word for the voice box. And this marks the end of the upper respiratory zone. So this is the most inferior structure of the upper respiratory zone. It's within the larynx that we find vocal cords. So as air is going through the vocal cords vibrate to produce sounds. Right? All right, so the trachea, what does the trachea do? It delivers air from the upper zone toward the lungs. And so the trachea continues to go down, and then it branches in two directions. We call that branch the bronchial tree. All right, so the bronchial tree brings the air into the lungs, both lungs, because it splits into a right bronchus and a left bronchus. All right, and then they continue to divide inside the lungs, from the primary bronchus to the secondary bronchus, from the secondary to the tertiary, eventually we get to terminal bronchioles. It's at the terminal bronchioles that the air reaches a dead end, and that's when the air reaches the alveolar sacs, and that's going to be where gas exchange is happening. So the alveoli is the site of gas exchange. Two lungs. Remember, the right lung has 3 lobes. The left lung has 2 lobes, and it's because that left lobe has that cardiac notch, right? That makes room for the heart. And the diaphragm is a sheet of muscle that controls breathing. Right. So when we compare the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein, remember this is where the color codes are backwards. This is the exception to the rule. Usually arteries are red, veins are blue, but this is the exception, right? So the direction of the blood flow. If we're in an artery, remember A for artery, A for away. So the blood is flowing from the heart and it's going to the lung. And the color code for pulmonary arteries is blue. And why is it blue? It's because blue always means deoxygenated blood is inside there, right? All right. And if we're looking at pulmonary veins, it's the opposite, right? Veins always go from the tissues of the body towards the heart. In this case, the pulmonary veins are coming from the lung to the heart. And pulmonary veins are carrying oxygenated blood, right? So they're going to be red. And because it's oxygenated. Okay. All right, so trace the path of air during breathing. So from your nose to the nasal. Oh, man. To the nasal cavity. And then to the pharynx, which is your throat. The pharynx, epiglottis would be open, allowing the air to go into the larynx. Through the larynx, we get to the opening of the trachea, which is actually called the glottis. It goes through the glottis as it enters the trachea. Down the trachea, we get to that bronchial tree, and the air gets split into two different directions, the right bronchus and the left bronchus. So from the primary bronchus, we enter into secondary. Bronchioles. And then tertiary bronchioles. And then finally, terminal bronchioles. And then we're finally at the alveolar sacs, right? Or the alveoli. So this would be the terminal bronchiole, bringing air all the way down. This whole collection of alveoli, we call that the alveolar sac. And the alveolar sac consists of individual air sacs called the alveoli. Oh my goodness. All right, so okay, what type of muscle tissue is seen in the bronch? Well, we're not in the heart, so we could eliminate cardiac muscle. We can't control these muscles inside of our lungs like we can the muscles that are attached to our bones. So we're going to eliminate skeletal muscles. So the only ones that really apply here are smooth muscles. What is within the alveolar sacs? Well, inside the alveolar sacs, there's going to be air inside. The wall of the alveolus is primarily composed of simple squamous epithelial cells, which is made of single layers. Remember, these walls are super thin. Why do they have to be thin? Because gases have to diffuse across them. Okay. All right. So the pulmonary circuit is the blood flowing from the heart to the lungs and then back to the heart. And the reason why we send blood from the heart to the lungs is because it's oxygenated. So you can see this blue color indicates that it's deoxygenated blood traveling from the right side of the heart through the pulmonary artery goes to the lungs, and it's within the lungs that oxygen is put into the blood, and then it returns back to the heart oxygenated. All right, so let's fill out this figure below using these different labels here. All right, and where do we want to start here? Let's start in the right side of the heart. All right, so we could add here, inside here, this is our right atrium, and down here, this thing is not behaving. Come on. Oh, come on. We have the right ventricle. All right. What do they want there? Over here, this is our right lung. All right, so it's the right side of the heart is sending the deoxygenated blood towards the lungs through this blood vessel here. This is going to be our pulmonary artery. And so the pulmonary artery is going to divide into the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. So you fill this one out, right pulmonary artery. This is the left pulmonary artery. All right, it's inside here that they're going to, the blood is going to find its way into pulmonary capillaries, and then gases are going to be exchanged. And then the blood is going to come back oxygenated in pulmonary veins. So this is going to be the right pulmonary vein. On the other side is going to be the left pulmonary vein, right? So what is being exchanged between the blood here? Well, oxygen is going in, right? It's entering the blood, where carbon dioxide is exiting the blood. This is going to be the left pulmonary vein over here. And this is the left lung. These are also pulmonary capillaries on this side. All right. And of course, this is the heart. I think that's what they want here is just this whole structure here is the heart. Over here, this is the, come on. I don't know. There we go. Atrium. This is the left ventricle. All right. And that looks about right. Let's keep moving. So you could see here, this is the terminal bronchial, and this is air is coming in and out, filling this alveolar sac. So air comes in, brings oxygen. But at the same time, these pulmonary capillaries are bringing blood to this area. So the carbon dioxide that is in this deoxygenated blood as it arrives leaves the blood, goes through those very thin walls, and occupies space in the alveolar sac. At the same time as we're breathing in, this space is being filled with oxygen. Again, these two gases are going to be moving down their concentration gradient. So there's a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood compared to the alveolar sac. That's going to cause the carbon dioxide to leave the blood, enter this alveolar space. the concentration of oxygen is going to be greater inside the alveolar sac compared to the blood, and that's going to cause the oxygen to diffuse down the concentration gradient from the alveolus into the blood. All right. So what is within the alveolar sac? Well, there's air in there. What is within the pulmonary capillaries? Blood. There's blood inside there. What's the process that's happening? Well, this process is called gas exchange. What gases are being exchanged? Oxygen, carbon dioxide. Which directions are they going? Oxygen's entering the blood. Carbon dioxide's exiting the blood. What kinds of blood vessels are surrounding the alveoli? They're called pulmonary capillaries. Why are the blood vessels so close to the alveoli? They're close because it allows for diffusion to occur. It facilitates the process of diffusion as these two structures, they need to be close together, right? Things don't really diffuse easily if they're far apart. These are snug. Those capillaries are snug right up against the walls of the alveoli. So remember, the respiratory membrane actually consists of two layers of cells. One layer is from the walls of the alveolus, and the second layer of cells is from the walls of the capillaries. What will happen if the respiratory membranes are damaged? Well, gas exchange will be compromised. And which vessels carry deoxygenated blood in the lungs? The pulmonary arteries. And which vessels carry oxygenated blood? Pulmonary veins. Here you can see a picture that compares a smoker's lung to a healthy lung. So obviously smoking, the tar and the chemicals that are in cigarettes cause damage, not only to the external structures of the lungs, but certainly internal. And again, that those chemicals, as they damage the tissues of the alveolar, then the gas exchange becomes compromised. So I'm going to leave you guys with two microscopic observations. One of them is going to be the air sacs, where you're going to label the alveolus, simple squamous epithelial cells that line the walls of the alveolus, and then you're going to label where the air would be, which obviously is going to be in the middle of those things. So in the notes, what I want you to do is estimate the diameter of one alveolus. All right, and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so this is a slide of lung tissue, and this is a low power magnification. If you want to use low power to do this, that's fine. But this is one alveolar sac. There's another alveolar sac. All right, another one. This is one individual alveolus. If we go into high power view, that's one alveolus, and there's another one. And you can see the walls are lined with single layers of squamous epithelial cells. Squamous are flat and plate-like, just like the ones that we took out of our cheeks. All right. And then obviously this is where the air would be, in here and in here. So label those three things, and you should be good. If we go back to the lab, we have another microscopic observation. This time it's the trachea, and it's inside. You don't have to estimate the size of anything here. Remember to fill out your magnifications. Now we're looking for the ciliated columnar epithelial cells. Remember, ciliated cells line the trachea, right? There's mucus in the trachea. So embedded in between the ciliated columnar epithelial cells, there's going to be goblet cells, just like we saw in the digestive system. And remember, these cells are ciliated. So as debris gets stuck in the mucus of the trachea, those cilia brush that debris back up where it came from, back up to the outside. Either you're going to cough it out or breathe it out, or you're going to swallow it and send it down into the digestive system where that debris will just become destroyed. All right, so if we look at the trachea, now this is the respiratory surface here. This is a low power view. This is where all the cartilage would be, which is external to the respiratory surface, right? Remember that cartilage is those rings around the outside. All right, so that's the respiratory surface. So that's where we're going to be finding our ciliated columnar epithelial cells. But this view is not strong enough. We have to zoom in a little bit. This is our high power view. All right, so there's that cartilage back there. Remember, hyaline cartilage is easy to find because all we're looking for are those googly eyes. We have a nice, clean purple matrix with the googly eyes looking at you. So that's a good indication that we're looking at hyaline cartilage when we see that. Now I can see over here at the respiratory membranes these ciliated columnar epithelial cells. And embedded between there, we have these darker cells that are kind of stained a little bit differently. And these are goblet cells. So these goblet cells are producing mucus. As they produce mucus, it lines this membrane here with mucus. And we could see these little hair-like structures extending out of the cells. And that's the cilia, right? So as debris gets stuck in the mucus here, it's these cilia that will then brush it back up and send it back up where it came from, not allowing it to get deep in the lungs. Sometimes debris does get deep in the lungs, and then so deep that we lose the ciliated columnar epithelial tissue as we go deeper and deeper. So what has to happen down there? We do have white blood cells that are patrolling down there, white blood cells like macrophages that would then find that debris and then get rid of it. All right. So this concludes the lab. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. You could email me. Fill out these lab books and make sure that you're doing these microscopic lab observations, because you never know if I might collect them and count them as part of the lab. All right, the lab exam. Okay, I hope you're all doing well, and this is it for today. Take care.